On a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby. Martyn Iles is Managing Director of the ACL. He's back with us. Martyn, a special welcome back to 2020.
Good morning, Neil. Good to be back.
Hey, Martyn, let's get a focus, first of all, on Western Australia. An interesting development because Christmas is closing in. This is a time of year Christians certainly celebrate the incarnation, Jesus' birth, laid in a manger. Mary and Joseph. Well, Westfields in WA, including drag queens in Santa photos. What's your thought here on this developing controversy?
Well, this was a story that came out last week, and it was an announcement by Westfields in Western Australia to much sort of fanfare, and they thought it was a very good and progressive thing to do. They decided that they were going to have sort of pride-themed Santa photos, and that they were going to have the opportunity for Santa photos this Saturday just past to be done with the presence of drag queens and all the other paraphernalia you will often see associated with sort of the pride movement. And I suppose it's a problem for two reasons. The first reason, Neil, is one that you just alluded to, which is that I know that Santa isn't Christian, but he's not particularly offensive to the Christian nature of Christmas. Whereas to bring in the pride element and the drag queen element is directly offensive to the purpose and the meaning of the holiday. And so it's really poor form and probably tone deaf to the realities of what Christmas is to be doing this. But the other thing is that it is another creative way for activists to be bringing children and drag queens together. And we're seeing that a lot. Many listeners will be familiar, for example, with this phenomenon known as drag queen story time, where local libraries and schools and all of this will bring a drag queen in to sit down in full drag and read storybooks to children. And it seems really weird for the uninitiated looking on, thinking, what is that about? And what it really is about is, and this comes straight from those who invented the idea in San Francisco, and it's gone around the world, but they say that it is about giving children queer role models and sort of something to aspire to or something to normalize for children so that they can see that it's good to be queer, or that or that they can have queer people to look up to and be exposed to queer ideas and stuff like that. And that's drag queens are cross-dressers. They tend to be highly sexualized in the way they cross-dress. They are actually adult entertainers. Their usual sort of, I was going to say day job, but I suppose it's a night job, is to be adult entertainers. And so it's completely inappropriate for children. And I know that Christian families would not be in the business of actively seeking out, queer normalization or queer role models for their children. But that's really what's going on here. That's the goal. It is to sort of change the minds of kids in relation to these sorts of concepts. And the adult entertainment connection is really, really concerning. So we've always been opposed to the drag queen story times, and we're very much opposed to this drag queen themed Santa photo shoots because it's just inappropriate. It's got a close association with concepts that most parents are not really interested in exposing their kids to. Westfield have really, really missed the mark here on in multiple ways. We've therefore been running a bit of a campaign to say to people who, if they're living in Western Australia, look, get in touch with Westfield in Western Australia and let them know that that was not something that you approved of and it didn't do their brand any good in your eyes. And something like 4,000 people have already contacted Westfield in WA through that campaign. That's on our website, acl.org.au. But if there's public discontent and if it does not enhance their brand and it causes upset, then they may not do it again. And I'd like to see it stop because I don't think that kids should be exposed to adult entertainers or to queer role models.
Interesting, isn't it, Martyn? And you might have photos in your own family album that your parents had taken when you were sitting on Santa's knee in a shopping centre and you were just a small child, and you grow up to adulthood. Every now and then you look back through those old albums and you see the photo of you sitting on Santa's knee. Interesting, isn't it, to think that someone has an initiative that, kids getting their photos taken today may well be looking back on these in 10, 20 years' time, and rainbow flags and glitter and drag queens in the same photo as your Santa photo. It doesn't really look good for, for the sorts of things that shape the future of a young life. Hey, I just wanted to ask you, though, many women are finding the caricatures of the drag queen to be quite demeaning. This seems to be picking up pace. Any thoughts here and the connection to these ways that drag queens associated with Santa actually even demeans womanhood?
Yeah, look, I completely agree with that as well, Neil, and that is one ground on which, there are feminist groups and so on who completely object to the drag queen phenomenon, and especially the drag queens being introduced to kids in various ways. And one of the grounds that they disagree on is not necessarily a Christian ground, although I think we share the concern, but it is that the caricature of a woman, which a drag queen impersonates, is a highly sexualized caricature. They exaggerate various anatomical features and so on, and it is demeaning, and I actually completely agree with that. And I don't think it's a good role model of what a stereotypical woman is at all. And so that also is, I think, it's not a good seed to be sown in a child's mind. And the genius of this, Neil, is actually, it sounds crazy to us, but the genius of it is in exactly what you just said, which is a photo on Santa's knee is a little bit of a cultural thing. It's something that everyone does. And of course, they like to get the queer role models into those places where it's a cultural institution or it's a cultural habit. And yeah, you're right. There'll be photos out there now with all queer-themed stuff sitting on Santa's knee for Christmas, and that normalizes it. That brings it into the family. And that's the genius of it. And I don't think anybody should be happy about it for a host of reasons, including reasons that may not even have an explicitly Christian foundation like the one that you just described.
Well, as serious and as sensationalist as it sounds to be talking about drag queens and Santa and children's photos, it's not the most serious thing happening this week. Perhaps the most serious thing might be around Christian schools being at risk in the Northern Territory. Big developments this week. What's happening, Martyn?
Yeah, the Northern Territory is the latest state to make a move which is undermining the ability of Christian schools to prefer to hire Christian staff. And it's important, as I've said before, just to note that you can't actually have a Christian institution unless the staff are Christian. It's a little bit like you can't have a Liberal Party unless the people working for the party have liberal values. You can't have a Greens Party unless the people working for the party have Greens values. And political parties can discriminate in employment for that reason, because they're a political party. And it's the same with churches and religious institutions. They've always been able to say, yeah, it's a Christian school. If you're going to come and work here, you need to be able to uphold and live by our Christian statement of faith, our Christian values. Christian faith is preferred. There's nothing unusual in that historically, and it makes perfect sense, because without that, you're not going to have your Christian school. However, there has been a move against Christian schools lately to try and strip them, not political parties, mind you, but just the Christian school, of their right to prefer staff who share their ethos. And we saw some stories break around the country. There was the story about City Point Christian College and how bad their code of conduct was. And then there was another story about a school in New South Wales and how bad their code of conduct was. It was kind of softening up the public for a political move, which a number of states are now pursuing, including, for example, Victoria, and the federal government is expected to follow later next year, to remove this right to prefer Christian staff from Christian schools. The Northern Territory is the latest state or territory, as the case may be, to go down this path. They've proposed laws that would do that. It's very, very serious, all of the Christian school bodies and the various churches up there are incredibly concerned about this, because it really is the beginning of the end of really serious Christian schools in the Territory. And there's been a great response from churches, from bishops, and various people getting together to express their objection. People can join in that. I believe that there's actually a gathering in the forecourt of Parliament this afternoon that people can go and join if they live in Darwin. But also they can go online to acl.org.au and there is a campaign there where they can write to their local Member of Parliament to say that they want to save their Christian school and they don't like what's going on here. So that's an important campaign to be a part of and an important trend to be aware of going on around the country.
And of course, as I always say, a Christian school is not separate from the Christian church. In fact, it's like a subcategory of what church does, providing that schooling. So when you change the laws like this, Martyn, you're creating these offence-based laws, and then anyone who feels a little bit offended can lodge a vilification complaint. So there's an intimidation fact here, and the sort of threat that there might be legal action over whatever you do as a Christian school. Any thoughts there on those offence-based laws, because they are becoming much more common?
Well, that's the other part of this law reform in the Northern Territory. So the first part is that it's removing the right of Christian schools to prefer Christian staff. And the second part is that they want to bring in laws that make it possible for anyone who feels offended on the basis of some identity trait, like whether it be their sexuality, their gender identity, or their gender, or their religion, or their political affiliation, or whatever. If they feel offended, or race and various others, people know the menu by now, I think, but if they feel offended on the basis of any of those things due to the conduct of somebody else, then they can take legal action. They can go to the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal. And Neil, you raise a really good point, which is, well, if in a school setting something is said or done, or there might be a code of conduct in the school about gender or about sexuality or about some Christian principle, and if somebody feels offence on the basis of that code or on the basis of what somebody does in the pursuit of that code, then all of a sudden they can go off to the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal or the Human Rights Tribunal and start legal action. Or even if I was to say something in a Truth of It video, or you and I would have a conversation here on the phone, and somebody in the Northern Territory says, I feel offended on the basis of my identity attribute because of what you said or what you did, then again they can go off to the Human Rights Tribunal or the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal and drag people who are making fair comment on public issues, or people who are trying to uphold a Christian ethos in their church or their religious institution. They can drag them off to courts. And that's the other part of this law, and another reason why those who are listening who might be in the Northern Territory should really go online and write that email to the Parliament to say it's not a good idea, or even be part of that protest, the details of which will also be available online.
Okay, that rally this afternoon in the Parliamentary Forecourt in Darwin, 4 p.m. Some details at acl.org.au. Hey, Martyn, another huge thing that's happening this week, of course, the Victorian state election. It's almost upon us. On Saturday, the majority of Victorians will head off to the polls. There's already been millions of pre-poll votes already, but Victoria is off to the polls this weekend. What are your overall thoughts?
Oh dear, poor old Victoria. And I think a lot of people living down there will just agree with that statement. The political situation is not great. Everybody knows that, well, not everybody, but many Christians know that Daniel Andrews is the worst political leader in the country when it comes to Christian values. He has a very, very strong anti-Christian social agenda, which he has enacted with blistering speed in recent years. Everything from being the health minister at the time, who brought abortion to birth for any reason to Australia in 2008 in Victoria, right through to more recent actions like criminalising prayer for LGBT people, even if they request it, or raising the spectre of domestic abuse over parents who don't simply affirm the felt gender identity of their child, and so on and so on, coming out and calling Andrew Thorburns' beliefs and everyone who shares them bigots. It just goes on. He has enacted one of the most astonishing programs of social reform in Victoria, which is profoundly anti-Christian. And so you've got that guy as Premier. Polls are indicating that he is going to win the next Victorian election on Saturday. That is a tragedy. It is true, however, that when we've been in negotiations with the Liberal Party, the opposition, and others as well, not just us, increasingly we are unable to find any actual policy difference between the opposition and the government on any of these social issues. The opposition has promised that they will not adjust those laws about prayer or domestic abuse. They have promised that they will not protect the rights of Christian schools to prefer staff who share their ethos. They will not do anything to unpick or change the incredible radical social agenda of the Andrews government. So you end up throwing up your hands in despair and saying, what are we supposed to do? You've got Daniel Andrews, whose evil is really in his strength. He knows what he's about. He knows what his social agenda is, and he's pursuing it doggedly. And he knows that it's anti-Christian and that's what he wants. Whereas you've got the other side, and their evil is not in their strength, it's in their weakness. They simply don't have the moral courage to stand up against anything that is happening, to draw a line in the sand or oppose anything that is happening on the social policy front. So you've got two really bad options. Obviously, I would have to say that the Andrews government, their record speaks much louder than maybe just the weakness of the Liberal opposition. So, you know, the record of the Andrews government is truly bad. But the hope that we have is this. It is that in the upper house in Victoria, a few good minor party candidates might get elected. And if there's a few good minor party candidates in the upper house in Victoria after Saturday, they can put a handbrake on the Andrews government social agenda. That's the hope. For example, candidates from parties like Family First, parties like the Democratic Labor Party, the DLP. Look, even the Liberal Democratic Party, they're not great on social values, but they're very good on religious freedom, freedom of speech and things like that. So that's helpful. So if some of these minor parties could get into the upper house in Victoria, that could be a real check and a balance and a handbrake on the radical social agenda. So I just encourage Victorians to think about that as they're going to the polls, and think especially about their upper house vote, because that looks like that's what's going to make the difference this Saturday.
Well, it's a little disheartening to think that, as you say, Martyn Iles, on this coming Saturday, when Victorians go to the polls, they will be electing a lower house government that will be anti-Christian. The similar or same agendas as you describe. And that having a balance of power in the upper house may be the only way to put some sort of a handbrake on some of these very woke anti-Christian bills. I note that on your victoriavotes.org.au website that you actually have a list of all of the candidates who are ascribing to Christian faith. Many of those will be standing for upper house. Some of those will be in lower house seats too. But there's an awful lot of people who have got a Christian foundation who are standing for election this coming Saturday.
Yeah, that's important to note. Whilst the parties are in a bit of a terrible state, there are individuals in the parliament or running for election who are really people of solid faith and values. And to get them elected could be really helpful over the next few years as influencers within their parties. And so I would ask people to go to that website. Neil, thanks for mentioning it, victoriavotes.org.au. That's an ACL website. And we do have a list there of those candidates or MPs who are already in the parliament who affirm a strong Christian faith and who seem to have decent Christian values. Now, it's not an exact science. People are so varied and so different, and no single person is the same as another. So it's not an exact science. Some will be stronger than others. But we feel like in the current situation in Victoria, that's as good an indication as anyone's going to be able to give as to sort of what to think about when you go to vote. So there's a handy list there. It's very simple, very straightforward, easy to read. So just go to victoriavotes.org.au and people can have a look at that. It may be helpful, especially when it comes to that upper house vote.
Now, I know that you've had thousands of your ACL Standing Army volunteers who've been involved in letterboxing and making phone calls and all sorts of things. No doubt some will be manning polling booths for Christian candidates. Is there still room for a few more friends there to stand up and be part of getting a Christian elected?
We are always looking for volunteers, Neil. It's interesting. We have more volunteers signed up and active in Victoria than any other state. So there's some encouragement for people who may be living on the ground in Victoria. There is an incredibly active group down there that are going to be doing great work, not just this month, but also in the next 4 years to help equip the Victorian public with the information they need to make smart decisions when it comes to voting day next time as well. But yes, there's always room. acl.org.au/volunteer people can go to. And on that page, they can just fill in their details to volunteer. And you're right, we've had a huge number of volunteers fanning out into the suburbs and the streets of Victoria and Melbourne and putting things in letterboxes, spreading literature, especially around that minor party vote, to try and draw out comparison between some of those minor parties and to show people that there are minor parties out there that are prepared to stick up for family values and for Christian values. And it's those guys that we really need to see elected to the upper house. So, yeah, much prayer's gone into that, and we trust that that'll have some effect on the voting public in the next few weeks.
Well, it's all bad news in the lower house so far as a Christian perspective. A glimmer of hope for the upper house, for Victorian listeners in particular. victoriavotes.org.au to glean some of that detail and to go to the ACL website, acl.org.au, for some of those other campaigns in the Northern Territory or in Western Australia. Martyn Iles, always good getting your insights. I want to thank you so much for taking some time to share those with us today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Always a pleasure.